Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and all I can say to you and every other Marvel fan out there is this: they did it. After 11 years and 22 films, the first major arc of the MCU is complete. How insane is that? All of those plots, arcs and characters finished off with style and creating one hell of a goodbye. Yet there is one thing that's weighing heavy on the minds of some of the audience, and no, it's not that brilliant Hail Hydra scene, but the concept of time travel, which leads me to this video. As you can see from this title, there are going to be some major spoilers going on as I dissect the plot of the film, so if you've not seen it, you have been warned.
Now, the issue of time travel in films is very rarely done in ways that are bulletproof, outside of brain-melting flicks like Primer, but that is definitely another video that honestly, I'm not clever enough to make. In other films, we see the confusion around what happens to the past self, what happens if you alter the time in terms of split or divergent timelines, and as Back to the Future proves, it can create some really horrible situations with your own mothers.
However, the mother we're talking about today is the time travel in Avengers. So let's try and make this snapping together. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and with the might of writing legend Simon Gallagher, we're going to explore and explain the Avengers' confusing time travel. Now, it seems that everyone has a different take on precisely what the Avengers were doing across the film. Either they created a new reality or timeline each time they dipped into the past, or they were remixing the established main timeline and everything is locked into one core progression. Now, within the logic of the MCU, the latter one makes the most sense, as it's backed up by comments from Bruce Banner and the Ancient One.
First up, during the scene in which each character is mentioning the rules of time travel based on Hollywood's most popular examples like Back to the Future, Time Cop, Terminator, etc., Banner wipes all of those off the table, lending them to be called bullshit. Where all these movies go down the route of X thing changes in the past, therefore Y is affected in the present future, Bruce states that the only perspective that matters is that of our characters.
Banner clarifies that your past becomes your present, and as we're following this group of Avengers throughout, that's all that matters in understanding Endgame. And it's actually doubled down on by the Ancient One when Banner visits her, because she shows us a visual diagram of the main timeline, highlighted by a giant orange streak of piss, holding things together because all 6 Infinity Stones are present and correct. Now, she notes that removing one to serve the present/future will fracture the core timeline and reiterates the need for the stones to remain so that they can be used to defend Earth. So with both of these pieces of evidence, it's safe to say that all the events that we've seen across the last 21 movies are set, and terrible pun incoming, in stone. You can drag objects and characters, bring them forward within the timeline, and the time in between essentially becomes Schrodinger's cat. It exists and does not exist simultaneously until witnessed. Now, it is worth noting here that these black tendril split realities do actually start to exist, and we will actually cover one later with the disappearance of Loki. But the whole point of Endgame is to eventually reduce everything back to one solid timeline. At least that's the only explanation that seems to work. It does raise some questions because the film acknowledges that split timelines exist, but they don't matter to this plot.
However, it can't be nice for those people who end up in these splintered timelines thanks to the actions of the main group. The example that we're shown is from the Ancient One, who states that if her time stone was taken, that there would be no way for her to protect their timeline from threats such as Dormammu. After all, how could Doctor Strange hope to make a bargain without the power to do so?
However, what we need to remember is this: taking something from the past does not change your future. Instead, what it does is affect someone else's future instead. Which leads us to Captain America, as plenty of people have been claiming that Cap's final resting place in the canon doesn't add up, based on the idea that time travel creates multiple realities, and him going back to marry Peggy would negate the future that he's sat in as an old man at the end. If changing the past fractures the timeline, he couldn't then be in the same spot as our Bucky and our Falcon. However, going off of the one timeline theory, Cap's life plays out as follows.
After being given the serum in 1941, going into the ice circa 1941 to 43, and getting thawed out in 2011, he continued to lead and help the Avengers until 2019. After helping defeat Thanos, he decides to go back in time to around 1941 to 1943, meeting back up with Peggy and living the other life that he lost in the plane crash. We now have a main timeline where there are two Captain Americas, with our Steve Rogers living with Peggy under the radar, presumably, and with Peggy covering for him, and his younger self remaining stuck in the ice. I wonder if he ever went to visit himself. Anyway, that is not the point, because this timeline is now more of a time loop and keep going. Cap only has one progression, but his timeline loops back before continuing. It carries forward from the 1940s to 2019, only to loop back around as he finally ages through the years he first spent in the ice.
The twist, again, is that his iced self hasn't actually gone anywhere. He's just waiting to enact the events that will lead him back to the past.
There is a problem though, because old Cap does meet old Peggy when he comes out of the ice, but the only way we can possibly explain this is that either Peggy keeps everything from him and acts incredibly well, or she and the other Cap simply tell him and ask him not to let on. He's an honourable man, and he will get his dream in the end if he's patient, basically.
Either way, he still has to make it to that bench for that all-important reunion with Bucky and Falcon.
What you really need to worry about, though, is the fact that when Cap kisses Sharon Carter in this timeline, he's kissing his own niece. So maybe that bit no longer happens, yeah? Let's move on from this problem to another, more giant and purple one. Namely, if Thanos is beaming in from 2014 to 2019, then how the hell does the snap even take place? I mean, if he left that timeline, then he would never have gathered the stones in the first place, and therefore the future doesn't exist, right?
Well, it's wrong, but only because the MCU tells us that this is not true. Yeah, it's a bit weird, and actually, we need to take up that Schrodinger's cat argument again. The MCU is telling us, in as plain a terms as it can, that Thanos being plucked from 2014 doesn't change reality, because it can't.
The timeline that we're dealing with fundamentally has to have a version of Thanos that used the Infinity Gauntlet to snap away half of existence, only to get beheaded. Those events cannot be changed, and not even by killing a younger version of this would alter the course of time. This is proved somewhat by Banner explaining it as such, and Nebula surviving despite having killed her younger self.
So therefore, when Tony comes to use the gauntlet, we have to assume that his request was one of two things. One, he wished to destroy Thanos and his followers right there and then. The surrounding environment doesn't change, so his decision definitely centers on population control rather than reshaping the damage that was done. And two, he wipes them from the present and sends Thanos back to 2014 with no memory of his failure.
This way, all of the events of the main timeline happen as expected, and it all eventually leads back to Stark Snap saving the universe. Also note that Gamora goes missing, and Quill is seen running a search program for her. If Situation 2 had happened, Gamora would have died by Thanos' hand, and Quill wouldn't have any vital signs to search for. So what we have is this. 2014 Thanos is killed in 2019. His death does not affect the timeline that we are watching our set of heroes in.
However, what that does imply is that there is now a timeline without a Thanos and where a ton of other things do not come to pass. Yet, as strange as this is to say, this doesn't matter to the timeline we're in. Yet, it's not the only time fracture that the film just asks us to forget about, as we all saw Loki nab the Tesseract and disappear.
Surely with him gone, it means that we have a fracture in the main timeline, albeit one that does actually set up Loki for his own TV show, which is rather convenient, isn't it?
Yet, if we're accepting that we have only one timeline to maintain, this surely can't be something that exists on its own for very long. And weirdly enough, we have to accept that Loki's escape is going to be short-lived and will be resolved with the Tesseract being returned to Odin's vault by the time that Thor: The Dark World comes to pass. We simply have to.
Luckily though, we can turn to Captain America for one last bit of help closing this apparent time-based plot hole.
Endgame goes to great lengths spelling out that there are only so many chances that they're going to get to put everything right. In fact, they make sure to say 1 round trip and 2 practice runs. That is, until we see Cap pick up 4 vials in the 1970s and leaving 2 behind. Now, using the same theory we've had this whole time, that the Avengers we're watching are the only ones that matter, Cap isn't visiting a number of realities to restore order, but just points across the main timeline instead. By dropping in at key points in the established canon, he either prevents Loki from escaping by restoring the Space Stone's original position in the 70s, or Loki still escapes into his own TV reality show, only for events that we haven't seen yet to transpire and for the Tesseract to be returned before Thor: The Dark World.
Either way, Captain America is about making a life for himself and Peggy in the background of every other movie's events.
Cap is the only character who manages to loop back on his own timeline, and that's likely down to setting the last Infinity Stone in place, then remaining in the physical space he was left in, opting to miss his window to return to the present.
The Tesseract is the oldest Infinity Stone that we've seen in the MCU, and it makes sense that Cap would place it back into Howard Stark's storage last, way back in the early 1940s.
To Cap, keeping everything as it should be would be his priority. After all, that's America's ass on the line if he doesn't. Therefore, as much as it might be a stretch, we have to conclude that Captain America closes these time holes off from the main Avengers timeline to stay intact. So once more, thanks Cap, you did us proud. And there we go, those were our thoughts on the Avengers' confusing time travel, and we hope that we've done a good job in trying to explain them. If not, or you've got any other thoughts about it, let me know down in the comments section below. Who knows, you might even be from the future yourself, although why you'd be spending your time on a YouTube comment thread is beyond me. Actually, there is something you can do for your future self that we should all do together in general, and that is take care of it. If there's something that's going on in your life that's causing you a lot of issues, a lot of mental strain, it is okay to take a break from it. It is okay to ask for help. And you know what? You'll be surprised at how much people actually care. Trust me. All right? If you want to chat more about this or anything else, then you go follow me at RetroJ over on Twitter. And as always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye.